Welcome back to another instalment of New Zealand's Bird of the Week, where in this video I will be talking about the laughing owl, New Zealand's largest owl species that's apparently had quite the peculiar list of calls that are now unfortunately lost to time. I hope you enjoy. In terms of their visual appearance, they were overall yellowish brown, striped with darker browns as well as having more pale faces, with others being more rufous, likely down more so to individual variation than any subspecies difference. Their eyes were a dark orange, and overall were a good deal larger than the other New Zealand native owls, the moorpork, being about twice their size at about 40 centimeters in height with proportionately longer legs and weighing about 600 grams. This made them a good deal less arboreal up in the trees than moorpork, and meant that they would have been nearer the ground more often. Being found across all three of the main islands, they were once considered unique in their own genus of coeloglocs, the scoundrel owls, because of their mischievous sounding calls. Although recent genetic studies have found that they actually clade within the genus of Ninox, alongside the moorpork and the other related boobook owls. As more will be got into about how the English name came to be, it is foremost relevant to mention how important these birds are for our understanding of ancient New Zealand, with, for example, out of the 59 fossil sites known in South Canterbury, 27 of them are attributed to the owl's habits. This is because of the habits of ejecting pellets of their prey after feeding, a key owl trait, which, with their expulsion, allowed for the otherwise extremely fragile bones of their prey to be preserved in an adequate matrix, key for preservation. This is further improved by the fact that they roosted in rocky crevices and caves, being most plentiful in and around the limestone bluffs and rocky outcrops present in South Canterbury and Otago, which meant that the bones, once deposited, could remain in place with little in the way of disturbance. These kinds of deposits were first recognised in 1993 from a west coast cliff, some having been used for up to 10,000 years, showing key parts of their diet, as well as its composition throughout time as well, with the pellets sometimes forming deposits of up to half a metre thick in places. Up to 28 species of birds, a tuatara, 3 species of frog, 4 geckos, a skink, 2 bats and 2 fish were all found at just one site, with fantail, robins and pio being among the most common targets. Once Pacific rats were introduced into New Zealand after Maori arrival, the owls were able to switch to eating them as some of their other prey items declined, with them being evident in the subfossil record soon after their introduction. Osteological analyses and comparing their wing and leg proportions to other owls suggest that they were often terrestrial, catching prey on the ground while also still being decent flyers, something which is supported by the relatively high abundance of more terrestrial animals found in their deposits. Getting more into the birds themselves, they got their name of laughing owl or the laughing jackass from the wide variety of calls, which range from shrieks to prolonged calls which were apparently incessant on rainy nights, apparently similar to 2 men yelling over a distance, as well as barking noises like that of small dogs, apparently being similar to the living and unrelated cook and black petrels, which, if they're anything to go by, they must have surely been very distinctive. They were overall quite tame and could easily be captured and recaptured with little struggle, with much of what we know about them coming from 2 people, them being Thomas Potts and William Smith, who documented much of what we know on them through their own personal knowledge and trips out to view them in the mid through late 1800s. Potts mostly wrote on them from personal knowledge gained during trips into the headwaters of Canterbury rivers during the 1860s through 70s, noting that they'd often chase after bats through the leaf litter on the forest floor, more often than not on foot. William Smith, who was a gardener on the large estate of Elbury Park in South Canterbury near Timaru, who would go on in his later years to live up in Ashburton, often encountered the birds in the crevices of the limestone cliffs that were a prominent feature of the area, with him on his days off attempting to catch them, either to give them to ornithologist Walter Buller or to keep some for himself in captivity to make observations on them. He caught 5 adult birds and 1 chick from the region, maintaining the adults in captivity for several months, one even laying eggs while there. To obtain them in the first place, he first aimed to use long wires to hook them out of their crannies, though this proved to be pretty ineffective. He then tried the method of lighting some dried tussock grass and burning it near the crevice to fill them with smoke to force them out, which proved more successful as the birds were slowly trod out to avoid the unpleasant smell. He made some very worthwhile observations of them while they were under his care, with him recording that they molted during the summer, becoming almost naked. This made them pretty vulnerable, as it would happen, as 2 of the captured birds were in fact stunned to death by a swarm of bees in January when they were still lacking their feathers. This is very unusual for birds, so it could also have been the case that the owls were in some way suffering from some kind of ailment or infection like feather lice, that or a dietary deficiency. According to Smith, when their eggs were laid, they were mainly laid in September through October, with them being incubated for 25 days. The male would feed the female on the nest as they tended to the eggs, with them being more quiet over this time period. None of these observations recorded more than 2 eggs or nestlings, which is unusual since owls often have larger clutches, usually raising larger broods in years where prey is more abundant. It is more likely though that instead, like many of New Zealand's other avifauna, laughing owls were slow breathing and long-lived, something down to the unique ecology whereby they lived without mammalian predators, and this would prove to be a big issue for them. By 1880, it was noted that they were becoming increasingly rare, with Smith lamenting in 1903 that, quote, "Our old and genial friend is now almost extinct in Canterbury, with their calls becoming rarer and rarer by the year." He rightfully attributed their decline to the recent introductions of mustelids like stoats and ferrets into the region to suppress rabbits, and that they were very potent to them, certainly doing more damage to their populations than to any of the vast swaths of rabbits now in the area. These last holdouts were documented well by 2 men, Cuthbert and Oliver Parr, who lived in a house near the entrance to a small side of the Oberhe River, and were surrounded by limestone cliffs. About 200 metres up from the valley was an area termed by them as Owl Rock, which in 1909, or soon after, the brothers took some photos of a fledgling owl, which remain to now as some of the best photos documenting them and appear to be the only ones of them out in the wild. They obtained these photos by crouching on a grass slope near one of the cavities, peering in intently before noticing large eyes staring back at them. In finding one, they set up their quarter plate camera on a tripod and extracted a mouse corpse from one of their bags. When they were ready, they enticed a small bird out with the mouse, moving it in front of the cave, having to wave said mouse in front of them several times until they grabbed it. Then, with a blinding flash, they took the photos I've shown here. After Cuthbert has went over to Europe to fight in World War I, Oliver, who was at the time too young to enlist himself, remained in New Zealand, eventually having a son named Ted, who, when he was 14 in 1940, was taken up with his dad to the Owl Rock to show him the unique birds. However, they were all gone, with them only finding nest material in their place. To this day, there remains on the walls nearby the woods Owl Rock and Oliver, a testimony to the extinct birds and showing that they once lived in this and other such areas. The last authenticated sighting an owl seen was one found dead on a road near Timaru at Bluecliff Station in 1914, though sightings and reports from afterwards indicated some may well have been holding on in areas like Raincliffe and the like through the 1920s and 30s, though these haven't been authenticated. The saddest thing of all is that the owls could well have been saved if more conservation efforts were undertaken, given they took very well to captivity, and some birds lived in such conditions for up to 18 years, being able to be shipped off as far off as Britain and other parts of Europe with little hassle. Moves afoot to move Kiwi, Kakapo and Huia, while not really getting off the ground back then, didn't even include the owls, which was perhaps down to the stigma of them being predatory birds, and therefore not worthy of such attention and resources. Today, little remains as to show us that they even existed at all, with only about 22 mounted birds, 28 skins, 2 preserved in alcohol and 17 eggs being all that we have left of them, with none of their apparently spectacular calls ever being recorded. With all the sightings and reports taken after they were last seen, the chance some owls are still hanging on in some inaccessible limestone bluffs is intriguing, though increasingly unlikely, but it would be pretty funny if some indeed are holding out in the wilderness of New Zealand, waiting to have the last laugh. And with that, I thank you for watching this instalment of New Zealand's Bird of the Week. For next time, you're able to vote for the sooty shearwater, common dark sea birds that inhabit much of coastal New Zealand. With that, I'll see you next time, whenever that may be.